Jack Lawson had always been a soldier, a man of few words, and a life lived under the shadow of orders. His heart had been hardened by years of combat, where emotions were a luxury no one could afford. He was known across the galaxy for his efficiency and unwavering focus. But today, as he stood on the cold, metal floor of the military briefing room, Jack's sense of duty was being tested in a way he had never experienced before. His mission was simple: capture and deliver an alien widow and her child to the highest bidder. The orders came from the top, an anonymous corporation with a reputation for dealing in the most unusual and often dangerous forms of trade. These were not typical bounties. They were alien species, rare and valuable, and the Tylosians were at the top of the list. The Tylosians were an enigmatic species. Tall, graceful beings with deep, shimmering skin, they were known for their incredible intelligence and a deeply empathetic nature. They weren't fighters, though. Their race preferred peace, tending to avoid conflict whenever possible. That made them even more valuable to the buyers who sought their abilities, for everything from scientific knowledge to the emotional healing that could be extracted from their very presence. Jack had heard about the Tylosians. Everyone had. What he knew for sure was that they were considered one of the most beautiful but fragile species in the galaxy. This particular widow, Xara, had recently lost her mate in a long-standing war. The corporation had decided to make a move for her and her child, Rivo, to sell them off to the highest bidder. Jack's job was to capture them, hand them over, and collect his payment. He couldn't deny the weight of the mission. It wasn't the first time he'd been given an order like this, but there was something different about this one, something gnawing at him deep inside. The faces of Tara and Rivo were just names on a datapad, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this mission. He tried to push it aside, focusing instead on the mission details in front of him. His superior officer, Commander Drayden, was waiting for Jack's acknowledgement. The commander was a man of few words, but the look in his eyes told Jack that there would be no room for failure. "Find them," Drayden said, his voice steady but cold. "Capture them. Don't let them escape. There are people waiting to buy them. We have no time to waste." Jack nodded. He didn't need any further explanation. This was his duty. As Jack prepared for the mission, the journey to the Tylosian planet was long and uneventful. He spent the time in solitude, focusing on the task at hand. When he finally arrived on the lush green planet that had been Xara's home, he was greeted by an eerily quiet atmosphere. The Tylosians lived in harmony with nature, their cities blending seamlessly with the forests and rivers that surrounded them. It was a peaceful world, one that Jack had never imagined he would be sent to destroy. He landed his ship near a small settlement, where Xara and her child were believed to be hiding. The moment he stepped off the ship, Jack was struck by the serenity of the place. The Tylosians' homes were built into the trees, the architecture flowing and organic, as if the buildings themselves were part of the living world. The air was filled with the scent of flowers and fresh rain, and everything about the place seemed designed to bring peace to those who lived there. Jack couldn't help but feel an odd sense of guilt. He was here to capture these people, to rip them from their peaceful lives, and deliver them to a life of uncertainty and danger. It didn't sit right with him, but the mission was clear. He moved quietly through the settlement, his footsteps silent on the soft ground. The villagers seemed to go about their day, unaware of the soldier who was hunting them. The world seemed to hum with a quiet energy, and Jack found himself almost drawn into it, forgetting for a moment why he was there. Then he saw her. Xara stood at the edge of the settlement, holding her young son close to her. Rivo's bright eyes looked up at his mother, trust and innocence shining in his gaze. Xara was tall, her skin a pale blue that shimmered slightly in the sunlight, her long hair flowing like silk behind her. She looked nothing like the alien captives Jack had encountered in the past. There was no hostility in her eyes, no fear. Instead, there was sadness, deep and unspoken, a loss that Jack could feel from where he stood. For a moment, he hesitated. His orders had been clear, But seeing the quiet bond she shared with her child, made Jack question everything. He knew that Tylosians were gentle, but they were also fiercely protective of their families. Sarah wasn't a prisoner. She was a mother, and Rivo wasn't some alien commodity to be traded away. They were people, real, living beings. The decision should have been simple. Jack should have walked up, captured them, and followed his orders. But something inside him refused to do it. He stayed hidden in the shadows, watching as Tara whispered something to Rivo, then turned and led him deeper into the settlement, out of sight. Jack's pulse quickened. He knew that if he didn't act now, they would slip away and the mission would be a failure. But he couldn't bring himself to move. The mission was suddenly not so clear anymore. Jack had been trained for moments like this, moments of indecision, of doubt. But this time, the training didn't seem to matter. This time, he wasn't sure what to do. And for the first time in a long while, Jack didn't know if he wanted to follow orders at all. Jack stood in the shadows, watching Sarah and her child disappear into the thick trees of the settlement. His heart pounded in his chest as he struggled with the weight of the decision hanging over him. The mission had been simple: capture them and deliver them to the highest bidder. But now, as he watched the alien mother protectively guide her son deeper into the peaceful settlement, Jack couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. Sarah wasn't just an alien to be sold. She was a mother. Rivo wasn't just a child to be captured and shipped off. They were people, with lives, with hopes and dreams. Jack had seen enough violence and destruction in his career to know what a real family looked like. The connection between Sarah and her son was unmistakable. They shared a bond so deep, so pure, that it reminded him of the things he had left behind long ago. Things he didn't allow himself to think about anymore. The mission was clear, and Jack was a soldier who followed orders. That was what he had always done. It was how he survived. But today, something was different. There was a shift within him that he couldn't explain. He thought about his own family, his younger sister, back on Earth, and how much he had sacrificed for his duty. What if someone like him had been sent to capture her, to tear her away from everything she knew? What if that had happened to his sister? He couldn't bring himself to do it to Sarah and Rivo. For a long moment, Jack remained where he stood, his mind racing. The air around him was thick with the scent of flowers and fresh grass, the peaceful hum of the Tylosian settlement contrasting sharply with the storm brewing in his heart. He had been taught to separate himself from the emotions of his missions, to focus solely on the task. But now, he couldn't turn off the feelings that tugged at him. He thought about the corporation that had given him this mission. They didn't care about Sarah or her child. They only saw their value in credits, in the trade they could make by selling them to the highest bidder. Jack had seen the way the galaxy operated, cold, ruthless, and indifferent to the lives of those caught in its gears. It was a system that used people like Sarah and Rivo as commodities to be bought and sold for profit. But that wasn't the way he saw them. He had always believed that the only way to survive in this galaxy was to follow the rules, follow orders, complete the mission, and never ask questions. But now, for the first time in his career, Jack felt like those rules weren't enough. He looked at the mother and child who had no idea they were being hunted, and he felt a deep sense of guilt wash over him. He didn't want to be the one who brought harm to them. With a heavy sigh, Jack took a step forward, then another, silently moving through the dense underbrush. His mission was still fresh in his mind, still pulling at him like an anchor, but there was something else now, something stronger. He couldn't simply let them be captured, not without knowing what would happen to them. He needed to understand more about who they were, about their lives. Jack continued through the settlement, making sure not to make a sound. His footsteps were light, his senses sharp. As he passed the quiet homes of the Tylosians, he couldn't help but notice how different their world was from the one he knew. It was a world built on trust, on peace. The Tylosians had learned how to live in harmony with nature, their technology deeply integrated with the environment around them. There were no weapons, no guards, no signs of fear. It was a place where everyone belonged, where families were safe. It felt like a world that Jack could never be a part of, a world he had been trained to destroy. As he neared the heart of the settlement, he saw Xara again. She was sitting near a small stream, her back to him, talking softly to Revo, who was playing with a small, colorful stone. Her voice was calm, soothing, a sound Jack could barely hear from where he stood, but he could sense the love and care in every word. It was clear that Xara would do anything to protect her son. Jack didn't know how he could bring himself to take that protection away. Jack hesitated again. He was no stranger to difficult decisions, but this one felt different. He had been trained to deal with enemies, to neutralize threats, but he had never been told how to handle a situation like this. He couldn't look at Xara and Revo and see them as enemies, as targets. They were simply people, just like him. For the first time, Jack realized that his orders weren't the only thing that mattered. There was something more, something he couldn't ignore. Maybe, for once, it was time to trust his instincts. His thoughts were interrupted by the faint sound of footsteps approaching. Jack quickly stepped back into the shadows, his pulse quickening. The last thing he wanted was to be caught by the Tylosians, especially when he was so conflicted about his mission. A group of Tylosian villagers appeared, walking quietly through the settlement. They spoke in soft, melodic tones, and Jack watched them with interest. They seemed so peaceful, so unthreatened by his presence. It made him wonder how they viewed the galaxy beyond their world. Did they know the dangers that lurked out there? Did they know that their peaceful lives were at risk? Jack's mind was spinning. His mission was not just about Xara and Rivo anymore. It was about everything. About what he had been trained to do, and what he knew was right. There was a battle raging inside him, one he had never faced before. He couldn't stay here, but he also couldn't leave them to face what was coming. Jack's mind made up, but his heart remained torn. Jack stood hidden in the shadows, watching the Tylosian settlement with a feeling of dread creeping up on him. His mission was still the same: capture Xara and Revo and deliver them to the buyers waiting for them. But everything had changed in the hours since he first set foot on this peaceful world. Jack had seen the way Xara protected her child, the way they shared a bond that went beyond anything he had ever witnessed. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He glanced over at the small hut where Xara and Rivo had taken shelter. The mother had settled her son down for the night, and the sounds of their quiet voices reached Jack's ears. He could hear her soothing words, though they were too soft to understand. There was no fear, no anxiety in her tone, only the love and protection a mother gives to her child. The more he watched them, the more he realized that he couldn't bring himself to follow through on his orders. There was something deeply wrong about what he was being asked to do. He had fought battles, taken down enemies, and followed orders his entire life. But this felt different. This wasn't a mission of war or strategy. This was about family. And Jack knew that he couldn't destroy that. The thoughts swirled in his mind, each one pulling him in a different direction. He had been trained for moments like this. He had been taught to carry out orders without hesitation. His duty as a soldier was clear. But now, standing in the quiet of this alien world, the rules seemed less important. Jack wasn't sure what had happened to him, but he couldn't ignore the pull of his own conscience. What had happened to these people, the Tylosians, was wrong, and Jack could no longer be the one to carry out that wrong. A sharp voice broke through his thoughts. "You've been standing here for hours." Jack froze. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. It was his old friend and fellow soldier, Rice. Jack had served with him for years, but Rice had always been more focused on following orders, on completing the mission, no matter the cost. He was everything Jack used to be, a man of duty, no questions asked. Jack turned slowly, finding Rice standing behind him with his arms crossed. Rice's expression was one of concern, but also impatience. "I thought you'd already completed the mission," Rice said, his voice low. "Why are you still standing here?" "I can't do it," Jack said, his voice quiet but firm. I can't take them. I can't sell them. Rise raised an eyebrow. What are you talking about? We've been given orders. You follow the orders, and you get the job done. Simple as that. It's not that simple anymore, Riz, Jack replied, shaking his head. I've been watching them. Sarah and her son. They're not just aliens to be sold. They're people. They have lives. They have feelings. And I can't be the one to take that away from them. Riz looked at him for a long moment, his face unreadable. Jack could see the gears turning in his friend's mind, trying to understand what Jack was saying. You're losing your focus, Jack, Riz finally said. This isn't about feelings. This is about the mission, about survival. You know how it works. You're a soldier, not a caretaker. I know what I am, Jack snapped, his voice sharper than he intended. But I also know what's right. And what's right is not taking these people and handing them over to be sold like cattle. Riz took a step closer, his gaze never leaving Jack's. You've always been a good soldier, Jack. But sometimes, being a soldier means making hard choices. We don't get to decide who lives or who dies. We just do our job. Jack's fists clenched at his sides. He knew Riz was right, but it didn't change how he felt. I can't do it. Not this time. For a moment, there was silence between them, a heavy weight hanging in the air. Riz seemed to be weighing his options, trying to figure out what to do with Jack. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. You're making a mistake, Riz said, his words almost gentle. You're risking everything for two people you don't even know. You're going to end up in a lot of trouble over this. I'm already in trouble, Jack replied. I don't care anymore. The two men stood facing each other, both knowing that the path Jack was about to take would not be easy. But Jack had made up his mind. He wasn't going to follow orders this time. He wasn't going to hurt these people. He would protect them, no matter the cost. I'm not going to capture them, Jack said, his voice steady. I'm going to help them. Rice stared at him, disbelief in his eyes. Help them? What does that even mean? Jack's gaze hardened, determination filling him. It means I'm going to take them somewhere safe, somewhere the corporation can't find them. You're risking everything for a mother and child. Rice asked, his voice rising in disbelief. What do you think you're going to accomplish? You can't protect them forever. I'm going to try, Jack said simply. I can't just walk away from this. I'm not that man anymore. Riz shook his head, clearly frustrated. Fine, do what you want. But don't say I didn't warn you. If you get caught, it'll be the end of you. Jack didn't answer. He simply turned away and started walking toward the settlement. His heart was pounding, but there was a weight lifting from his shoulders with every step. He had made the choice. He was no longer just a soldier following orders. He was a protector of the innocent. And that was something he could finally live with. The decision had been made. Jack didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew he had to protect Sarah and Revo. They were not just part of his mission anymore. They were lives he had to safeguard. He moved swiftly through the settlement, the weight of his choice hanging over him like a storm cloud. As he walked, his mind raced with plans and questions, but one thing was clear. There was no turning back now. Sarah and Revo were still at their hut, the evening air settling gently around the trees. Jack moved closer, making sure to stay out of sight. His heart thudded as he approached, but he tried to keep his breathing steady. He couldn't afford to mess this up. He needed to speak to Sarah and explain everything. He needed to tell her that they were in danger, that the very people who had sent him were the ones who would take her and her son away from this peaceful life. Jack reached the edge of their hut and peered around the corner. Sarah was sitting by the small fire she had built, her gaze distant, lost in thought. Rivo was beside her, clutching a small, colorful toy. The peaceful image of the mother and child almost made Jack hesitate. For a brief moment, he questioned what would happen next. Would they trust him? Would they believe him? He wasn't sure. but he had to try. He stepped forward, careful to make his presence known without startling them. "Sarah," he called softly. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes wide with caution. For a moment, she said nothing, her gaze fixed on Jack. Then she slowly stood up, her protective instincts immediately kicking in. Rivo clung to her side, looking at Jack with wide, curious eyes. It was clear they didn't trust him yet, but they knew something was about to change. "I'm not here to hurt you," Jack said quickly, raising his hand slightly in a peaceful gesture. "I need to talk to you. Both of you." Sarah didn't lower her guard, but she didn't pull away either. She studied Jack for a long moment, her face a mask of caution and curiosity. "Why are you here, soldier?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp. "What do you want?" "I was sent to capture you," Jack began, his voice steady, though his heart raced. "I was supposed to take you to the buyers, to sell you." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "But I can't do it. I can't take you away from this place." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't speak right away. She glanced down at Rivo, who was still holding onto her, and then back at Jack. There was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, but also a deep sadness. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft. "Why would you refuse your orders?" Jack took a deep breath. He knew this wouldn't be easy, but he had to explain himself. "Because I can't take you away from your home. I can't take you away from your son. I've seen what you have here, what you've built. It's not right for anyone to come and tear that apart. I was wrong to think you were just an asset to be traded." Sarah studied him carefully, her expression unreadable. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Jack could see the wheels turning in her mind, weighing his words against the reality of her situation. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you asking us to trust you?" she asked. Jack nodded. "Yes. I know it's hard to believe, but I'm not your enemy. I want to help you." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, as if searching for any sign of deception. Then she slowly relaxed her stance, her shoulders softening. She glanced down at Rivo, who had started to play with the toy in his hands again, oblivious to the conversation. A sad smile tugged at her lips. "I'm not sure if I can trust you," she said quietly, "but I can see that you don't want to harm us." "I don't," Jack said firmly. "I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want to make sure you and your son are safe." Sarah seemed to consider this for a moment, her eyes flicking between Jack and the peaceful settlement around them. Finally, she nodded. "If you are serious about helping us, then you must understand something." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "The corporation you work for, they won't stop looking for us. They won't stop until they find us. And once they do, we won't survive it. We have to leave this place. We have to hide." Jack's heart sank. He had known this, of course. The corporation was ruthless, and they would never let Sarah and Rivo slip away without a fight. But hearing it from her, hearing the fear in her voice, made it feel even more real. "I understand," Jack said quietly. "I'll help you leave. We'll find a place where they can't find you." Sarah met his gaze for a long moment, her eyes filled with uncertainty. But there was also something else. Hope. Hope that Jack might be telling the truth. Hope that they could find safety. "Where will we go?" she asked. "I have a place," Jack said. "It's far from here. We'll be safe there. No one will think to look for us." Sarah hesitated, but then nodded. "Then we'll go." Jack breathed a sigh of relief. It wasn't over yet, but this was the first step. He had made a choice, and Sarah had agreed to trust him. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since he landed on this planet, Jack felt like he was finally doing something that mattered. He turned toward the ship he had hidden nearby. "We leave tonight. The sooner we go, the better." Sarah looked down at her son and gave him a soft smile. "Rivo," she called gently. The little boy looked up at her, his face lighting up as she reached out to him. "It's time to go. We have a new journey ahead." Rivo clutched her hand and nodded. Jack took one last glance at the peaceful settlement, knowing that this would be the last time he would see it. But there was no turning back. They had a future to protect now, a future they would fight for, no matter what. The night was cool and quiet as Jack led Xara and Rivo toward the hidden ship. The settlement was still, the soft rustling of leaves in the trees the only sound in the air. It was hard to believe that in just a few hours, the peaceful world would be left behind, replaced with an uncertain journey into the unknown. Jack had no idea what awaited them, but he was certain of one thing. He wasn't going to let them be taken. Not again. Xara walked silently beside him, her expression calm but determined. She had barely said a word since they decided to leave. She was a mother, and that's all that mattered to her right now, keeping Rivo safe. Jack understood that. The bond between mother and child was unbreakable, and Jack knew Xara would do whatever it took to protect her son. Rivo walked a little ahead, his small feet making soft sounds on the ground. He was still playing with his colorful toy, his mind not fully understanding the gravity of the situation. He had no idea that their lives were about to change forever. Jack kept his pace steady, his eyes scanning the surroundings. His training as a soldier had made him hyper-aware of his environment, always on alert for danger. The quiet of the night was unsettling. He knew that the corporation's search for Xara and Rivo had already begun. They would not stop until they found them, and Jack wasn't sure how long they could stay hidden. "We need to move fast," Jack said in a low voice, glancing at Xara. "We don't have much time before they realize you're gone." Xara nodded without speaking, her eyes focused ahead. She had lived a life of constant fear, always looking over her shoulder. Jack could see the weariness in her posture, the weight of her past experiences pressing on her. But there was something else there too. Hope. For the first time, she was allowing herself to believe that there was a way out of this nightmare. They reached the small clearing where Jack had hidden the ship, its dark silhouette blending into the shadows of the trees. The ship was nothing grand, but it would get them off the planet and far away from the corporation's reach. Jack had worked quickly, hiding it in the only place he thought would be safe. Now they had to board and leave without drawing attention. Jack stopped at the entrance and turned to Xara. "Stay close to me. We'll be out of here before anyone knows we're gone." Xara's eyes flicked to the ship, then back to Jack. "How far will we go?" she asked softly. "As far as we need to," Jack replied. "Somewhere safe, where they won't find you. We'll figure it out along the way." Xara nodded again, but Jack could see the anxiety behind her calm exterior. This was the first step into an unknown future. It was the first step toward freedom, but also toward danger. They weren't the only ones who knew how to survive in the galaxy. There were others who would stop at nothing to capture them, to bring them back. Jack led them onto the ship, making sure everything was ready for departure. He didn't have much time to prepare, but he'd done his best to make sure they had enough supplies to last for a while. As Xara and Rivo settled into the small, cramped cabin, Jack went to the control room. He checked the systems quickly, his hands moving efficiently despite the tension in his chest. "Everything's set," he called over his shoulder. "We're ready to leave." Xara and Rivo were quiet, Rivo sitting next to his mother as she wrapped her arms around him. Jack saw the fear in their eyes, but also the trust. They were trusting him to keep them safe, and he couldn't afford to let them down. He took a deep breath and activated the engines. The ship hummed to life, its lights flickering on as it slowly lifted off the ground. Jack's hands tightened on the controls. They were leaving the planet, leaving everything behind. But the journey was just beginning. The real fight was still ahead. As the ship climbed higher into the sky, Jack looked out the window. The settlement was fading into the distance, a small, peaceful world that would soon be out of reach. The stars above seemed endless, and for a moment, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they would make it. But the moment was short-lived. A sharp beep sounded from the control panel, pulling Jack's attention back to the present. He cursed under his breath. They had only been in the air for a few minutes, and already he could see the danger approaching. "Company," Jack muttered. "They're already looking for us." Sarah stood up quickly, her eyes wide. "What do we do?" "We keep moving," Jack replied, his voice calm but urgent. "We have to stay ahead of them. If we stop, they'll catch us." Jack punched in the coordinates for the nearest safe zone, a remote sector of space where they could lay low for a while. He set the course and activated the ship's faster-than-light drive. The stars outside blurred as the ship shot into faster-than-light travel, the familiar hum of the engines vibrating through the hull. But even as they sped away from the planet, Jack knew they were not safe. The corporation would stop at nothing to track them down. They would use every resource at their disposal, and it wouldn't be long before they sent their best hunters after them. Jack's mind raced, thinking of every possible way they could escape. They had to stay hidden. They had to keep moving. "We can't stop," Jack repeated, more to himself than anyone else. "Not until we're far away." Sarah looked at him, understanding in her eyes. "Wherever you take us, I trust you." Jack didn't answer right away. He just nodded, his mind focused on the task ahead. The road to safety was long, and the obstacles in their path were many. But as the ship hurtled through space, Jack knew one thing for certain. He would protect them. He would do whatever it took to keep them safe. The ship hummed through the cold emptiness of space, its engines pushing them farther from the planet, farther from everything they had known. Jack sat in the cockpit, his eyes fixed on the control panel. He had set the course for a remote sector, one that was far off the usual trade routes. The odds of being found here were slimmer, but Jack knew the corporation would do everything they could to track them down. It wasn't just a threat, it was a certainty. And Jack had to be ready. Sarah and Rivo were in the small cabin behind him. Rivo had fallen asleep, curled up in his mother's arms, unaware of the danger that still lurked in the distance. Sarah, on the other hand, was wide awake, her eyes often drifting toward the small viewport, watching the stars pass by in a blur. Jack could tell she was still trying to process everything that had happened. One moment, she was hiding on a peaceful planet with her son, and the next, she was fleeing into the unknown with a stranger who claimed to want to help her. Jack couldn't blame her for being cautious. He didn't trust anyone easily either, and the burden of responsibility weighed heavily on him. He had promised to protect her and Rivo, and every part of him was determined to see that promise through. But with the corporation's agents now on their trail, the road ahead was getting more dangerous by the minute. The ship's alarm beeped suddenly, pulling Jack from his thoughts. He immediately checked the scanners. A blip appeared on the screen. Another ship, moving fast and heading in their direction. His heart skipped a beat. He knew they'd been found. "Damn," Jack muttered under his breath. They hadn't been in FTL travel for long, and already the corporation had found them. It was no coincidence. They had probably tracked the ship's departure or were using advanced technology to pinpoint their location. Jack quickly engaged the ship's defensive systems, ensuring the shields were up and weapons were primed. He wasn't ready to fight. He didn't want to, but he would if it came to that. Sarah and Rivo had to survive. That was the most important thing now. He spoke into the comm system, his voice low but steady. "Sarah, we got company. You and Rivo need to stay out of sight. I'll handle this." Zara's voice came back immediately, a note of concern in her tone. "What's happening? Are they after us?" "They found us," Jack replied, his mind racing. "It's just one ship for now, but they'll probably send more soon. Stay hidden, and don't come out unless I say so." Zara's voice softened. "Be careful, Jack." "I will," Jack promised, though he couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was only beginning. Jack navigated the ship through a series of evasive maneuvers, trying to shake the pursuers off. He wasn't a pilot by profession, but his training had taught him how to handle situations like this. The ship veered to the left, then right, twisting and turning to avoid the incoming fire from the enemy ship. The alarms blared as the shields absorbed the hits, but Jack could feel the strain in the ship's structure. They were taking damage, and the hull groaned in protest. He checked the rearview monitors and saw the other ship closing in fast. They had no intention of letting them go. Jack knew the corporation didn't operate like that. They were ruthless, and the longer they remained out of reach, the more determined their enemies would become. He had to make a choice: fight or flee. Shields holding for now, Jack muttered to himself. But for how long? He adjusted the ship's course, heading toward a nearby asteroid field. It was a risky move, but the field would offer some cover. The enemy ship wasn't built for the kind of sharp turns and tight maneuvers the asteroid field required. But Jack hoped the pursuing ship wouldn't be able to handle it as well as he could. They needed to gain some distance, and the asteroid field was their best chance. "Hang on, Sarah," Jack said, speaking more to himself than her. "We're not done yet." The ship dove into the asteroid field, its engine screeching as it narrowly avoided collision with large chunks of rock. The enemy ship followed closely, its weapons firing in quick bursts, narrowly missing Jack's ship. The tension was unbearable. Every turn felt like a chance to slip away, but every moment also brought them closer to being caught. Jack's hands flew over the controls, sweat beading on his forehead as he kept the ship steady. The asteroid field was becoming more dense, and the risk of collision was growing with every second. But Jack pushed forward, weaving the ship through the obstacles with precision. The enemy ship's weapons fired again, a shot hitting the tail of their ship and sending a jolt through the hull. Jack gritted his teeth and cursed under his breath. They couldn't take many more hits like that. He had to act fast. He saw an opening, a narrow gap between two large asteroids, just big enough for their ship to pass through. It was a tight squeeze, but it was their best shot at escaping. Jack pressed down hard on the thrusters, guiding the ship through the gap, with barely an inch to spare on either side. The enemy ship followed, but it didn't have the same agility. As Jack's ship emerged from the gap, he glanced behind and saw the pursuing ship collide with a smaller asteroid. It veered off course, losing valuable time. "Gotcha," Jack muttered under his breath, a grin forming on his face. The enemy ship slowed, its trajectory thrown off by the collision. Jack knew they weren't out of danger yet, but they had gained precious seconds. He pushed the ship's engines harder, putting distance between them and the attackers. Behind him, in the small cabin, Sarah and Revo were holding on tightly, bracing themselves against the sudden jerks and turns. Jack knew they were scared, but he couldn't let up. Not until they were safe. "Stay hidden, Sarah," he said, his voice grim. "We're not out of this yet." And as the ship continued to race through space, Jack knew that they still had a long road ahead, one filled with danger and uncertainty. But he was determined to see this through. He would protect them, no matter what it took. The ship sailed through the quiet depths of space, the stars glittering like distant jewels in the endless black. Jack glanced at the scanners. The enemy ship was no longer on their tail, but he knew better than to relax. The corporation's hunters were relentless, and though they had managed to escape for now, it wasn't over. It would never truly be over until Tara and Revo were safe, far from the reach of those who would exploit them. Zara, still shaken from their narrow escape, sat quietly in the back cabin with Revo. The little boy had fallen asleep once again, his head resting against her shoulder, blissfully unaware of the dangers that had chased them across the stars. Sarah gently stroked his hair, her eyes full of concern and fear. She was thankful for Jack's protection, but the reality of their situation was not lost on her. They couldn't keep running forever. Jack knew it too. They had to find somewhere to hide, a place that even the corporation couldn't find. They couldn't keep fleeing from one close call to the next. There had to be a way to start fresh, to build a future. He kept his focus on the navigation system, trying to think of a safe place where they could lay low. The coordinates he'd set earlier had taken them into uncharted space, far from the reach of most common ships. But Jack knew they couldn't stay in the same area for long. They had to keep moving, keep changing course to make sure no one tracked them. After a long silence, Jack heard Sarah's voice over the comm system. "Jack," she said, her tone hesitant. "Where are we going?" Jack took a deep breath and leaned back in his seat, considering his answer. He had always been the one in control, the one making the decisions, but now, with Chara and Revo's lives in his hands, the weight of his choices felt heavier than ever. "I'm not sure," Jack replied honestly. "I'm still figuring that out." There was a pause before Xara spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "We need to find a place where we can live. A place where Rivo can grow up without fear. I don't care where it is, Jack. We just need safety." Jack glanced over at her, feeling the weight of her words. He had promised to keep them safe, but he had no easy answers. The corporation was vast, its reach long. But Sarah was right. They had to find a way to stop running, to build the life. He thought about it for a moment, then his mind landed on a possibility. A place he had heard of in passing. A remote colony that wasn't controlled by the corporation. It was a small settlement, hidden deep within an asteroid belt. It was known for being a place where people from all walks of life could disappear. Outlaws, exiles, and those seeking refuge from the law. It wasn't a perfect place, but it could be their new home. "There's a place," Jack said, his voice steady. "A colony in the Zeta Belt. It's off the grid, out of the corporation's reach. It's a long shot, but it could work." Zara's eyes met his, her expression wary but hopeful. "Do you think they'll accept us?" Jack nodded slowly. "I think they will. People go there to disappear, to start fresh. It's not much, but it's safe. For now, it's the best we got." Sarah looked down at Revo, her hand gently brushing the boy's hair as he slept. "Then that's where we'll go." With a new sense of direction, Jack set the course for the Zeta Belt. It was going to be a long journey, one that would take them deep into uncharted space, but it was the only choice they had. As the ship drifted toward their destination, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of hope rising in his chest. It was strange to feel hopeful after everything they had been through, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Jack allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would find peace. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. Jack kept the ship on course, monitoring the systems, making sure they stayed ahead of any possible pursuers. Sarah kept to herself, but Jack could tell she was beginning to relax, even if only a little. She trusted him more now, and that meant everything. He could see it in the way she looked at him, in the way she spoke to him. She no longer saw him as just a soldier, an enemy. He had become something else, a protector, a friend, and even a kind of family. Rivo continued to be the bright light in their lives, his laughter and innocent curiosity breaking up the tension that hung in the air. Jack couldn't help but smile whenever the boy would ask questions or point out the stars outside the window. There was a purity to Rivo that reminded Jack of the innocence they were all fighting for, a future free of fear, free of the corporation's grasp. Finally, after several days of travel, the ship emerged from hyperspace, the Zeta Belt looming ahead. The asteroid field was dense, but Jack had studied the maps and knew the safest path through. The colony was located on a small, habitable moon that orbited one of the larger asteroids. It was well hidden, a perfect place for those who wanted to disappear. As they approached the colony, Jack felt a sense of relief wash over him. They had made it this far. But the journey was far from over. They would have to prove themselves, earn the trust of the colony's people, and find a way to start their new life. But for the first time, Jack felt hopeful. He had kept his promise. He had protected them. And now, they were about to begin a new chapter. "Here we are," Jack said, his voice filled with quiet determination. Sarah looked out the window, taking in the sight of the colony for the first time. It was a modest place, but it was theirs. It was their chance at a fresh start. "We made it." Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. We're just getting started. As the ship descended toward the surface of the moon, Jack knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they had a future now, a future they would build together. And that was all that mattered.